I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO and COO of Treasury Careers. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us for our global webinar today, The Forecast Philosophy, Time to Abandon the Budget. We are honored to be partnering with FP&A Trends to deliver this webinar to you today. We clearly have a global webinar today as we have registrants from over 40 countries. I would also like to thank our sponsor, Centage, whose strong commitment to thought leadership helps us make this webinar possible today. Before I welcome our featured speakers to the webinar, I'm going to offer a few quick words about Treasury Careers and cover a few housekeeping items. Rolling forecasts are an essential tool for financial planning and analysis with the potential to radically transform the traditional corporate budgeting process. If implemented properly, a rolling forecast expands planning horizons, reduces planning cycles, and helps in executing organizational strategies. Companies realize the rolling forecast's full potential only when they are ready to change. If it is not implemented with thought, it can become another non-value adding process, an expensive time waster without benefit to the organization. This global webinar will share insights of the International FP&A Board on the latest trends in rolling forecasting. Matthias Schott, head of Group FP&A at Maersk Group and a member of the London FP&A Board, will share his company's experience in implementing a rolling forecast and going beyond budgeting. A few quick words about TreasuryJobs.com. Treasury Careers orders content and resources that empower Treasury professionals to own their career success as a subsidiary of TreasuryJobs.com. We offer Treasury job opportunities, Treasury certification resources, complimentary webinars like this one today, a plethora of Treasury best practices, and even more, including a new Treasury certification. Now to our exciting housekeeping items. The slides are currently available under the handouts area in your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll send you links via email to the presentation and the webinar recording over the next 24 hours. For those of you interested in CTP or FP&A credit, you need to answer all polling questions and remain on for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions regarding CTP or FP&A credit, please send an email to ernie@treasurycareers.com. We'd like to hear from you, so please ask your questions at any time during the webinar in the Q&A area of your GoToWebinar control panel. Finally, we appreciate your consideration in taking a short survey at the end of the webinar, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. We have two great speakers today. Our featured speakers are Larissa Melnichuk and Matthias Schott. Larissa Melnichuk is the founder and managing director of FP&A Trends. FP&A Trends help companies to realize their innovative FP&A potential through training, consulting, professionals, networking, and debating. She is an experienced FP&A practitioner and has held senior FP&A positions at Emphasis, Ace Group, KeyBank, and HBC Bank before setting up and running the International FP&A Board in 2013. Larissa has been driving the board expansion into 11 countries in Europe, the Middle East, the USA, and Australia. Matthias Schott is head of FP&A investment analysis at AP Moller Maersk for the Transport and Logistics Division and has been actively involved with rolling forecasts for the last 5 years. He is an experienced FP&A practitioner and has held various FP&A positions at GE and Maersk. Matthias holds an MBA from a top-tier MBA school in Asia, and he is an active member of Beyond Budgeting and London FP&A Board. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to hand the floor over to Larissa. Larissa, the floor is yours. Please take it away. Thank you, Larissa.
Thank you, Ernie. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. We have really global webinar on rolling forecast best practices. So let me introduce to you our agenda for today. So the first question is rolling forecast. We will look at main definitions, advantages and disadvantages. Then we will look at rolling forecast 7 factors for successful implementation. The case study from Maersk Group, which will be presented by Matthias Schott. It will be the third question, and then we will look at London FP&A Board's 3 stages of rolling forecast maturity. So you will have opportunity to evaluate what rolling forecast maturity at the moment you have in your company. Then we will have some time for Q&A and conclusions and recommendations. So obviously, this is such a hot subject, rolling forecast. But firstly, we have to understand the definitions in planning, in FP&A, in planning, forecasting, and budgeting. The problem is that in many companies that I worked for before, and I can observe it now, that all these terms they used interchangeably, but it's very important for us to understand the main definitions in order to have and to develop the forecast the way how it should be developed. So firstly, plan. This is the detail how future will look like. The forecast describes what the future most likely to look like. So it should be absolutely not connected to the plan or to target setting or to the budget. And target setting, this is expression of intent and desire, when the budget is just allocation of the resources. So as we can see, all these four processes, they have absolutely different purpose and different description. So we have to remember that forecast describes what the future is most likely to look like. And it shouldn't be connected with budgeting, and there shouldn't be questions like, are we going to achieve our budget during setting of the forecast? So these are the definitions. If we go to the next slide. The biggest problem of traditional budgeting that definitely it doesn't allow us to look into the future the way how rolling forecast or any other techniques allow us to do. And I would say that the biggest problem of traditional budgeting, it's really very nicely described by this quote by Beata Bognes from Statoil Company. Statoil Company that abandoned the budget and implemented rolling forecast long time ago. And really very good example for our business community to see how companies can work without without traditional budgeting with rolling forecast and other methods for corporate performance management. So Beata said that during the budgeting cycle, we shine a strong light into the future, but then we turn off the high beams and we start driving into the next year with low beams only. As we drive on and the quarters pass, the low beams get gradually covered in mud and they become weaker and weaker. And the question is this safe way of driving in the dark? Probably not. So if we look at the next slide, this is a very good visual explanation of what is the rolling forecast. So we expand the the forecast always on specific number of quarters or months or even weeks sometimes. So this is the example of 5 quarterly rolling forecast. You can see how we forecast 5 quarters ahead. It doesn't matter that year-end finish at Q4. We still forecast 5 quarters every particular moment, every particular forecast period. So if we go to the next slide, it just shows us the benefits of rolling forecast. Obviously, it gives us better accuracy, it gives us more flexibility, quicker decision making, and improved corporate vision. But the main thing, it allows us for flexible decision making process with a properly established rolling forecast. We have a very good tool for good decision-making process, for scenario planning, for sensitivity analysis, for risk management, and so on and so forth. So let us look at the next slide. There are a lot of debate that it's not possible to have the best practice in rolling forecast because the companies are different and they don't have the same requirements to rolling forecast. But the idea is that we can have these general conditions or general success factors that are very, very important for us to consider before we start to implement rolling forecast, or maybe we can improve our existing rolling forecast when we take into consideration these important factors. First of all, this is the culture. And I always say that rolling forecast is a philosophy. So the company has to be ready for rolling forecast. The second is people. So definitely we need people, those that understand what is rolling forecast, that understand the key drivers of the rolling forecast. And this is not only finance people, but also not finance people. Those participants of the planning process. It's very important for us to have proper driver-based model that is implemented through the proper system. And Excel and some budget consolidation tools, they are not exactly this flexible and dynamic systems. Also, we need to have flexible processes, and this is obviously is individual task for each company. It depends on the industry and many other factors. And this is the way how we design rolling forecast. This is the factor number 5, and we have to take into consideration many factors there. And then integration. So a good rolling forecast allows us to integrate all the planning processes in the company, such as operational planning and business planning and strategic planning. So all your top-down and bottom-up processes. And obviously participation in rolling forecast is all very important. So to have an exact number of people that you need, not to make it too crowded, but at the same time to make sure that all these decision makers and all these key people in the business, they participate at the process. So now let us look at each factor separately. So culture, it definitely defines the philosophy of rolling forecast. Rolling forecast is not a measurement, but a management tool. That is why when we hear in the companies the first question from CFO or CEO when we do forecast process, they ask us, is budget is going to be achieved? This is the process when we start to measure, not to manage. So it should be non-emotional, it should be a very analytical process. And it shouldn't take into consideration desires of people for the future, because definitely this is non-emotional process. And company has to be ready for this. The second factor, and if we go to the next slide, it shows that this is people. There are so many requirements to FP&A people and also to those people that participate in planning, forecasting process. But the main thing that we need the new generation of FP&A professionals. They are not just accountants, not just consolidators of information. They really understand the key drivers. They can go and challenge people. They are a great business partners that they can explain rolling forecast to all those participants of the process. This is the second factor. When we go to the third one, this is our systems and models, incredibly important factor to consider. Even before you start rolling forecast, just ask the question, do you need another process that is static, that is very time consuming? In reality, you need something which is very flexible and dynamic. For this reason, the model should be driver-based, based on key drivers, and drivers should be cascaded from the top to bottom and from bottom to the top. And obviously, it's very important to have good systems, the system that allow you to use advanced forward-looking analytics, those that allow you to use your driver-based model, and also those that are no black boxes for you, because you are able to manage these systems in your finance department. So you are not relying on your IT department to change the drivers for you. So it should be managed by finance. So this is factor number 3. Now we go to factor number 4, the process. The main purpose of the process for rolling forecast is to allow less judgment but more analytics. Again, a lot of discussion in the FP&A world. What is analytical planning? Is it possible for us to abandon judgment from the planning process? Obviously, it's not possible, and judgment it always will be part of our process. But the point is that analytical nature of rolling forecast allows us to reduce judgment and to have more analytical approach. So where possible, we have to forecast business as usual through automated drivers where possible. But obviously, your future projects and initiatives, this is something which can allow some element of judgment, especially if this is the new initiative for you. But again, the assumptions, they should be clearly defined. and it's a good idea to bun adjustments to your forecast. I worked for one company where one of the CFOs really liked adjustment, and depending on the moment of actuals, he released or increased the adjustments to forecast, and in reality it didn't work very well. And traveling the world, I see that this is the practice that is still used in many companies. So we have to ban adjustment or so-called placeholder to the forecast, because this way it doesn't make any sense. So the next factor number 5, this is rolling forecast design, and this is where you really have to be creative with your company's requirements. So this is something about horizon of your planning, whether it should be next 18 months, whether it should be next 6 months or 3 quarters, and so on and so far. This is the level of detail that you need. This is the frequency of your reforecasting, and also speed of your forecast, how quickly you have to do this. It all depends on the company, but I must say that the horizon is so much different for different industries. Really, a very long planning or forecasting horizon is for mining companies, for pharmacological companies, and really very short one for retail industries, for airlines, and so on and so forth. So the factor number 6 is shown at the next slide. So we are talking about integrated process. Integrated business planning is a very hot subject at the moment. And in reality, for us to have integrated process, it's possible. It's really possible to do through cascaded drivers and through integration through rolling forecast that is implemented from this through the system. So top-down and bottom-up processes could be harmonized through common drivers and the systems. So this is very important factor of rolling forecast in order for us to be really productive with this tool. So the next factor and the last one, this is a rolling forecast collaboration. As I already mentioned, collaboration is very important, and this is where we in FP&A, in finance, we can play our business partnering role, educating people, explaining to them that a traditional static budgeting, where they almost have this budget for the next year, and when they adjust their forecast to the budget, it doesn't work anymore for the company. So this is our role to identify the drivers, to work together with our operations to find these drivers and to explain this and to develop the models to participants of the planning process. So we have to define key drivers, we have to train them, we have to implement participative process through modern system. And modern planning systems, they are very good to allow for this participative planning process.
Thank you, Larissa, for the opportunity to present our business case here to the audience. And thank you for the introduction on kind of the rolling forecast principles and the different key aspects that you need to take into consideration. I agree with all the key aspects you mentioned, but also I want to convey that it can be intimidating when you look at it when you get started. Hopefully, by running through the business case that we went through at Maersk, it will hopefully give you some confidence that you actually, with some small steps, can actually get away from the budget and go towards a rolling forecast. The rolling forecast first started with us 7 years ago, when we started looking at doing things differently. So it has been kind of a journey, and we are constantly still fine-tuning and improving what we are doing. So also think about it not as kind of a big bang approach that you do it and you're done. It is a journey you go on to improve your forecasting and improve your performance management. With that said, so the agenda that I have for today is is I wanted to quickly introduce the company I work for, just so you get an idea of when I talk about specifics and how it works in our business, that you can relate to it. Talk a little bit about what the journey we started 7 years ago and why we moved away from the budget, and then kind of the design criteria that we started out with, and kind of the process we ended up with, and kind of the benefits and success criteria for the implementation. Yeah. So if you go to the next page, I apologize in advance for the busy page. But it serves hopefully a purpose. Instead of showing you pictures of ships and trucks and containers, I wanted to show you right away kind of more of a financial analytical page. This is taken straight from our external quarterly year-end report, showing kind of the transport and logistics division. Just so you get an understanding of what we are looking at. And if you look at on the invested capital side, you can see that we have a fairly big balance sheet because we are heavy in assets in our business. So there's a lot of capex invested, which then means that of course a lot of your cost is fixed, which means that you need to really make sure you plan your demand and your supply correctly. Otherwise, you cannot make the margins that you want to make. The other thing you see on the page is that unfortunately on the returns, you can see they fluctuate quite a bit as well over the different years, and that has different reasons, of course, but a lot of them have also to do with the business environment. And that is, I think, what triggered 7 years ago, shortly also after the financial crisis, our decision to step away from the budget and to start with the rolling forecast. Is that the business cycles and the market cycles are becoming so unpredictable and so much higher in frequency that a traditional budget that you make at the end of the year for the next year, after the first quarter already becomes outdated, and that it is actually dangerous to hold on to that type of budget, because it could misguide the people and the organization into a direction, or not adjusting their business behavior according to the environment that is changing outside. Yeah. If we move to the next page. So when we started, in 2010, we were very similar to almost half of the companies that were out there now, with a standard budgeting process, where we would look at kind of a budget for 12 months, and then also a little bit longer, 4 years out, because we have long-lived assets. And there was a very detailed, by legal entity, a bottoms-up approach to creating a budget, and it was a fairly painful process to go through, and it took several months to complete one of these budgets. And then we ended up setting targets based on this budget, and then we would report a full year kind of estimate, and would follow up on this full year estimate against the budget for our performance analysis. And then, so what that meant is that we crammed a lot together into one process, and that means that there's a couple of shortcomings in that process, because in what you're actually trying to do is three different things. You would like to set, of course, ambitious targets for your businesses to try to achieve and to go beyond what they think they can deliver. At the other, another purpose you want to do is allocate your resources, your money, your people, towards the best possible return. And the third thing you want to do is have a realistic forecast. You can communicate to the market, you can prepare your treasury on. So, and if you try to combine these three, you will always end up with a compromise of these three, and you will not really fully achieve any of those. Plus, if you were stuck with kind of what I mentioned already, with a one-off budget, you're very slow to adapt to changes in the market conditions. I like the example of Beate Bogens with kind of the high beams and driving and turning down the high beams into low beams, and the further you look out, you turn off your lights and you're driving into the dark. So I think that those were the shortcomings that we saw, especially after the financial crisis. That was a very challenging period for us, and I think for a lot of other companies to deal with the changed environment outside. So we started off, and if we move to the next page, we started off by listing a couple of criteria together with our senior management to see, okay, so what do we really want to get out of this process, out of this management process? And these were kind of the key criteria. So we wanted to have a visibility that we could kind of really look forward and align on what we had. Wanted to have agility, so we could move actually if we would see that things are changing in the market. And we want to have some control with a balanced scorecard. And at the most importantly, I would say simplicity. So remove all unnecessary details. And that is a very simply said, but that is I think one of the difficult exercises to keep it simple and to stay only to the core details that you are needed for a rolling forecast. If you try to start to do too many details in there that are maybe nice to have but not necessary to have, that can go can derail the whole process. So with these main design criteria in mind, we started looking at what we could do, and we came into contact also with the Beyond Budgeting organization, and they helped us a lot in that process in trying to define, okay, what should the new management processes look like that could that would meet these criteria. That's if we move to the next page. Yeah, so we basically started separating out these different purposes. We separated into 3 different processes. So one was a quarterly rolling forecast, which Larissa already explained, where we roll kind of 5 quarters out every time. The other one was more of a strategic business plan, so a longer period plan. And then the third one is kind of a target setting. To start with the rolling forecast. So there, basically, we reduce the amount of detail that we forecast on. So we only do it on a business unit level. There can be some, sub forecasts underneath, but we consolidate on a unit level. We do 5 quarters, so we can already look into the next year when we are continuing to the year, but we keep it very simple. So we have a very simple P&L, balance sheet, and cash flow with about only 35 input accounts. So not a whole lot of detail on a lot of cost or on a lot of revenue drivers. And then we have a couple of specific KPIs for that business unit. It can be a volume driver or a cost metric or these types of things that are also then forecasted together with the financials. And these KPIs give us a lot more insight than we have in the detailed financials. And then on a quarterly basis, we review this forecast and look at the performance that we are getting, so to say, in the actuals. So what you learn from your actuals, you can actually use, of course, in your forecast. We look also at last 4, next 4 to understand the trend analysis of what is really achieving. So is it really realistic? We are expecting a revenue trend that has been going down. Is it really that we expect that to go up for the next 4 quarters? And then we have actions and corrections that we then follow through. So we never go back into a rolling forecast to adjust it. We just adjust it, for the next quarter. So we just kind of move on. We don't completely forget about the forecast, but we really just take the latest forecast that is possible. Now, one question I want to get out of the way right away is that I get a lot from people outside. Is they ask, so how do you can get away without a budget? Don't external people or somebody expects a budget? Sometimes that's the case. Yeah. We within the company, we always use the latest rolling forecast, and people are very used to that forecast kind of changing every quarter. If a certain external party or board wants to have a budget, then we just take one of our forecasts, so the Q4 forecast, for instance, and we give them that, and we write that is kind of then what they want to see as a budget. But we keep continuing to change our forecast throughout the year and extending the horizon of that forecast. Yeah. Then the second part of the story is then what we learn from these quarterly forecasts, and once per year we apply that also then in our strategic business plan, which is a 5-year long-term forecast, where we focus on the portfolio composition and also on the investments that are needed to bring us to these strategic plans. And that becomes then board approved, and there as well we don't allocate capital right away. We do dynamic capital allocation, which means that certain projects get a go ahead, but still need to be approved once they go become active. So you don't get this budgeting mindset that people have to submit kind of all kinds of projects to justify their spend for next year, and you will and they won't actually spend the money, and you won't have allocated money to other projects. So dynamic capital allocation, I think, is also a very important part of the mindset into the rolling forecast, that you always allocate your resources to the highest yielding projects, whatever they might be, and do that throughout the whole period of the year, instead of one time per year that you only open for business, so to say. The last part is then the target setting, where we use the target setting for compensation for our people, of course, which is then we do on a yearly basis, and we try to do it mostly on some financial KPIs and some relative KPIs, and they are specific to the business units or specific to the people that they are working there. And there we can get then quite ambitious targets. So what we mean kind of relative targets, that could be around market share, or that could be around around free cash flow or something like that. So that would mean then automatically you would have a kind of operational cash flow and investment cash flow offsetting each other, so that you make them relative and not necessarily fixed towards a budget, because you will have to remember that your forecast will change 4 times that year until you kind of sign off on these targets. So you have to, these targets need to be somewhat dynamic. Yeah. So how do we then really action that into our business units? Like I showed you in the beginning, the business units are pretty different from setup. We have a liner business. We have also container terminals. So they are, from a structure and an organizational point of view, also very different. And I think that is also where Larissa mentioned that it is about the people, the culture, and kind of the processes that you need to keep in mind and be flexible around that. So if we move to the next page, I have just a kind of a symbolic overview of our group, where we have the transport and logistics and the energy. So different business units have actually different forecasting models, so to say, to adapt to kind of the way that they are structured. The Maersk Line business, which is our container liner business, is a very centralized business, because it's a network business. We have about 700 vessels going around, and they are centrally kind of controlled on where they go, when they go where. So that's a very centrally run business. We have, of course, offices in 130 countries. So in that sense, the sales force is very decentralized, but a lot of the main drivers are very centralized. So that is much more kind of a top-down kind of forecast, where centrally certain demand supply assumptions are made, and capacity is allocated according to those, and then distributed into the details. Yeah, so there you could imagine kind of a forecast by trade where they match these demand and supply. Then for the terminals, to give you an example, that is much more a decentralized bottoms-up model. There we have around 70 terminals around the world, some very big terminals in Rotterdam, some smaller terminals in Africa. So they are very different in setup and even by region. So there they have actually a bottoms-up model where they forecast from a terminal level, but still on relatively high level financials, the forecast, and then consolidate by region into APM terminals. And then these different brands, they roll up then into the APM term or APM model group, so to say. Yeah, I hope that gives you at least an idea of that it actually can work for different business models and different companies, because I think MERS is a good example of actually different type of companies within one company that are all using the rolling forecast model. So you shouldn't accept if within your company people say, oh, that doesn't work for our type of company or our type of setup. I think it is possible to do it with the different setups. And then I think what I mentioned before as well as one of the most important things is the simplification. You have to keep these things as simple as possible. Really highlight for your forecast what do you want to do with it, and what you want to get out of it. Yeah, to make sure that you don't put in unnecessary details that make the process slower and more complex, and don't really add value at the end of the process. Yeah. If we then look at kind of the details of the quarterly forecast process, then what we do is to ensure that we have alignment across all the departments and the different brands. We make macro assumptions on growth rates, on GDP rates, on currency exchange rates, on oil prices, on fuel prices, and those are centrally made, not because we believe we can do a better job centrally than decentrally, but to make sure that we have alignment across the company, that we all use the same assumptions there. So those are distributed, that then go into the different forecasting processes, either top down or bottoms up, and that the business units use. Then the different business units submit, their financials, like I mentioned, 5 quarters, and then on the high level financials with some KPIs. And then also a presentation, and there it's really that the story really needs to also follow the financials, so to say, and then the performance that has done. We then consolidate the total picture to understand what does that mean if we take all these things, all these pieces together, and then we prepare some management reporting, and then we go into a quarterly review. And then it's finalized by understanding kind of the executive summary on every quarter and the follow-up items we have done for the next quarter. Like I mentioned before, we don't normally go back into a ROFO, but we just make sure that the next ROFO is improved. So it's kind of a constant improvement that we want to drive with this process as well. That we get better and better at forecasting. If we move to the next page, then I'll go into the realized benefits a little bit. So what we have been able to do with moving to ROFO over the last 7 years is simplification and getting numbers much more aggregated, and at the same time increasing our visibility by having these numbers much more updated. We have an improved performance discussion and then the 30-70% relates to the amount of time that we spent on actuals and forecast. So we spend a lot more time looking forward and understanding what is ahead of us and what we need to do to make sure that we make the most of what we see coming. Because if you spend too much time on the actuals, then there's not much you can do about that anymore. Yeah. I think we've been better and making decisions, and faster making decisions, and taking action on trends that we see emerging from our financials. And we see also setting better targets as we have a better grip of our numbers, because we are doing 4 times per year this ROFO, so we get much more comfortable with the numbers. And then what I mentioned as well, the dynamic capital allocation is, I think, also a key point in changing the culture around how people get money for different projects. If we move to the next slide, then some success criteria that were relevant for us. I think we had executive sponsorship and a management buy-in. So I think it's really important that this is driven from the top, from the C-suite, that they are on board with this, that they want to do this, that they see a need to change the planning processes and to get a better visibility. And that was pretty clear that was a buy-in. I think it would also help that our CFO at the time was already had experience with rolling forecast and was a big sponsor of that. The need to make change, I think that is also a key. The budgeting process, before we started, was a very painful process, and people wanted it to actually change because they didn't see it delivered the value that they had to put in to create a budget. And then I think some decentralization to make better decisions. So ensuring that the people that are actually have the visibility on what needs to be done, that they actually are the decision makers, and it's not just centrally a budget that is put together without the touch of reality, so to say. And then the volatility in the markets. I think the volatility played a key role in that we had to do something different in order to perform better. And I see that only getting increasing volatility actually in the last 5 years, more and more so, and us being more dynamic to adapt to those changes. So the next steps, just really quickly. So we're looking at doing a couple of things. Like I said, it is really a journey, so you never really finish with it. You just keep improving and changing the process to get a better outcome. We're looking at doing ad hoc forecasting, so only adjusting when it's needed. So if you believe that based on the assumptions that you made your last rolling forecast, that all those assumptions still hold and nothing really has changed, then there would be no need to really change your forecast. We've tried to do some of it, but actually because of most of the volatility, we have actually done most of the time a complete new forecast. But it is something that you can think about if you are in a more stable business, that you would only touch a forecast every half year or something like that. Then we're looking a little bit at scenario planning to try to understand, but this is more for the long-term planning, that we're trying to see, okay, so what are the different scenarios, what is preferable, what might be probable, plausible, and possible to validate kind of and stress test kind of our business plan for the future. We're also finalizing the implementation of a new rolling forward tool, which is called OneStream, which we use to do all our consolidation of our forecasts, and the tool can do a whole lot more to help us better prepare for our management information and our forecasting. And we're trying to also, together with OneStream, try to pilot some machine learning, where we are with just taking baby steps on this one, but where we're doing some forecasting of different components of some rates that we want to validate, to really understand kind of what are the drivers that are actually driving this. So it's kind of it's a supervised machine learning to try to get to what drivers actually do drive this one. So that has been kind of the journey we've been on for the last 7 years. I hope you got some good insights in what is possible and what the steps are that you need to take to move to a rolling forecast. I hope you can see that we have had some good benefits from implementing it, and look forward to receiving your questions. And I'll hand it over to Larissa, who will talk a little bit more about the rolling forecast.
Matthias, thank you so much for this interesting case study and for the overview. First of all, I would like to apologize for the quality of the audio. Is it okay now, Ernie?
It's still scratchy, but it's a little bit better.
So I think it's a good idea, Ernie, if you go through the slides from your phone, because connection where I am at the moment not very good.
Okay.
So please, if you can do this.
Sure. Thank you very much, Larissa, and I will do the best that I can. So the model, this compelling model is developed by the London FP&A board. So I think it's interesting, and you're looking at the 3 different states, and I think it's really beneficial to see where you're at and where you want to go, and then how do you get there. So of course we have the basic state where we have the basic model. There's no dynamics involved. Forecast is a measurement tool. A lot of times there's just too much detail. There's not a lot of collaboration, and that can be because it's overly centralized, but that can also be due to the systems that are involved. There might be some analytics, but those are basic. There's probably a lot of manual processes involved. And then also the primary tool may be a tool like Excel, which is really not built for this continuous environment. And then as companies become more mature, okay, we start to get into the driver-based model. You have an average level of detail, so you're starting to really dial in on what's important. A lot of times in the basic state, you can get lost in the details and also the data as well. So we have to be careful with what we call big data. So it has to be data that matters, right? The drivers that matter. So let's focus on the things that matter. Matthias shared, how they kind of transition to that a little bit less detail, and that's really what's going to make the difference. But then we start to see some movement in collaboration, some proactive analytics, we're getting some automation, and then we're starting to look at some FP&A systems. And then when we get to the advanced state, which is obviously where Matthias is in, but like you said, it's the journey. You have that driver-based model, the forecast as a management tool. You're really using that rolling continuous forecasting. Where you really get to is you're really optimizing the business agility. And really that's kind of what this is all about. So being able to adjust in real time and offer that market leadership. In terms of the forecast, you have lower levels of detail, you have high collaboration, which is often facilitated by systems in today's environment. So you can see things as they go through the forecasting process. You can see where things are getting stuck. You're getting into some advanced analytics, potentially some specific analytics. You've probably automated out the manual parts of the process that cause you problems. And then you have flexible FP&A systems, and then agile and integrated process. Again, it's a journey. So I think this is a great tool that's been developed, and it lets you see where you're at and then where you can go, right? So if you're looking to move from intermediate to advanced, you kind of see what's possible. And if you're looking as technology as a driver there, you kind of can see, okay, the technology needs to be able to do this. Does it facilitate high collaboration? Does it move me to the advanced analytics? So I think this is a great slide that I would print out for myself. So again, it's a great tool for the London FP&A board, and there's also a lot more content and background about this on the FP&A Trends website. So let me go ahead and launch a polling question just to level set and see where you are in the audience, where you see yourself in terms of the rolling forecast maturity currently at your company. And then we're going to go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and kick off the Q&A session as soon as we close this poll here. So I'm going to go ahead, in order to be mindful of our time, I'm going to go ahead and leave the polling question up for just another 10 seconds or so we can go ahead and get to the Q&A and tap into our great experts here today. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the 5-second warning, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close that, and then I'm just going to share the results and just kind of make a little comment on what we might expect, and then the closing remarks we'll kind of try and point those towards more of the demographics of the folks we have on the line today. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and share the results. Not surprising, the vast majority are in the basic state, but the good news is that's probably why you're on the webinar. So again, it might be about how do you get to that intermediate state, and then what's your journey, the next journey, but that first journey might be to that intermediate state. We have 5% of you in the advanced state. That's fantastic. I'm glad to see that 28% of you are in that intermediate state. Seems like you're on your way to making that journey. So that's fantastic. So let me go ahead and kick off the Q&A session for us. And Matthias, let me go ahead and direct a few questions your way. So can you speak a little bit in terms, you talked about there's a consolidation process, it's decentralized. Can you talk to how the data challenges have been met? Is it with systems, how you're passing the files back and forth, possibly for us?
Yeah, sure. I think the systems play quite an important role. That they are, of course, user friendly. They are accurate, but they are also able to kind of open to different people to stimulate kind of the collaboration. It's very important, I think, that you have one number that you're looking at across, the different, so that if people come into a meeting, that this is the number that they look at. And I think within our company we have come a long way in that, and that is also a journey to make sure you have the systems, you have the reports, and people really integrate kind of the rolling forecast in the way that they do business. I think what I've seen also from my experience is that budgets normally were done and they would disappear in the shelf, so to say, and it would be just the top managers who would have kind of the binder of the budget, and nobody would have the details. I think the systems play a key role in making this much more a democratic process, so to say, that people have access to the data, probably not all the data, but what is relevant for them, they have those details and can actually act based on that, so they know what is expected from them and how the next 5 quarters will look for their section of the business, so to say. So I think that's where the power of these systems should lie, in making sure that they are simple enough, people can operate them, and easy to extract data out. We have, of course, within the group different ERP systems, and we try to tie them all together with interfaces. So there's every company has their challenges, but it is possible. Again, if you really focus on the simplicity and the essential details that you would need for that type of report, and transfer only those data that you need into that rolling forecast application.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope I've explained it a little bit.
Oh, no, that's fantastic. So I'm trying to consolidate some of the great questions that we have here. So in terms of the length of your journey, can you kind of give us a little bit of a maybe they're together, but how long it took you? So obviously I like to look at it, and there's people, process, and technology. So how long did it take you to get the people in line, get the consensus, and then move the process forward, and then get the technology? So was it people, process, and then technology? Can you give us some color around that?
Well, I think first of all, it's culture, to be honest, I think.
Okay.
And then people will follow very quickly, right? So it is a cultural change, and it might seem daunting, but it is, of course, a change management process. And then you, of course, start with the people, but you have to give them kind of the systems and the process. So it is kind of across the board, so to say. It's very difficult to say that you have to focus on any specific thing. When we started 7 years ago, we started also very simple. We are also a company that is almost 88,000 people and in 130 countries. So you don't reach all the people as of day one, of course. So you start, of course, also from the top, and you get the top executives to buy into this methodology, and then you start breaking it down. I think in the earlier sessions, of course, there was probably still, and just naming a country, but somewhere in the US or in India, there was probably still a local budget created. But once on the central level, you start really using the rolling forecast, and you update them every quarter, and people get into the really using the data that this rolling forecast yields to them, so to say, so they can really manage their jobs according to what is expected from them. Then it really starts to incorporate, and it kind of starts to spread throughout the company.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and ask our final polling question your way, Matthias. Then I'm going to go ahead and launch our last polling question. Then I'm going to make some conclusions, recommendations, and some closing thoughts here for us. So you mentioned during your presentation that there's still your colleagues that you run into are still thinking that kind of this beyond budgeting is not possible. Can you share with us from your conversations and experience maybe 2 or 3 of the myths that you think out there of why it's not possible and why it's no longer the case in today's world?
The myths, yeah, I think people think you will have to have a budget where that you have to either meet or come over. But I think we have to move away from that cultural mindset. I think the thing there is that you have an organization with people that all want to run as fast as they can, of course, and you have to enable them with the tools that they can do that. By just saying once a year. Basically, we are open and we're discussing what you're going to do for the next year, and then not revisit that. That just doesn't sound right to me. It will be the same if that you run a bank and you only open 1 week a year, and the rest for the year you're closed for business. So that's not how business is driven, right? So we need to open it up, make sure that people can act on what they need to act on, and how the environment is changing. So I think that is one of the myths, so to say, that you have to have this budget. You can have targets, but then you have to make them more relative. So you say, okay, we want to increase market share by 2% or something like that. Then it's relative to the market. Or you want to have kind of what we are doing is you want to have an EBITDA gap compared to your competitor peer group, so to say. So then you say, okay, we want to beat the competition, but then you don't put like a fixed net results target or something like that, but you in US dollars, but you put a percentage of your EBITDA margin above the peer group or something like that. Then if the peer group does well, then you have to do even better. If the market is really down and your peer group does not that good, then you still have to do better than them, but not fixed, so to say. So you dynamically set these targets for people to still have these ambitious goals.
Great. Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close our Q&A session. Those of you who didn't get to your questions, we will do our best to follow up with you directly. Just a few conclusions, recommendations, then we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar today. So some key points here. Obviously, we mentioned traditional forecasting has many limitations, talked about those, and many of those are in terms of having just stuck. I like to call it a strategic anchor. So I think if you're still in that static environment, you have a strategic anchor, and the ultimate goal is to have that business agility. And again, rolling forecasts are a great tool to do that. Alternative, it gives you better perspective and flexibility. And then again, that needs to be a driver-based forecast to really optimize those benefits. And we went through 7 factors of successful implementation. Great for you to print out those slides. And we will be cleaning up the first part of the audio recording, so we'll share that with you as well. Apologies for that. And then a rolling forecast is really the vehicle to move you away from that traditional budgeting process and really operate in a proactive environment and really realize that competitive advantage in the marketplace. So I do want to take the time to thank our great speakers, Larissa and Matthias, for your great content and insights. Also like to thank our webinar sponsor, Sentence, for their commitment to thought leadership. Please note, right after the webinar, the survey will launch. You'll have the opportunity to request to be connected to Larissa Matthias and also our webinar sponsor to learn more about their solutions. And finally, a big thank you to the audience for your valuable time. If you have any questions about the content we covered during the webinar, please contact me at Ernie@treasurycareers.com. Thank you very much, everyone, and make the rest of your day great.